We both spoke to that yesterday.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
wanted to
Yeah,
share on that.
Maybe we should start with that.
That was the triple gem one. Yesterday.
Okay, yeah, and also maybe the one on social.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That would be nice.
Yeah, also on that one. Did you?
Yes,
We touched on it
we did,
yesterday,
yeah.
but we wanted to get your.
maybe near the end, maybe
Okay.
at the moment, probably like
Okay. What do we think?
yeah, I mean, definitely. To see something.
I mean, this was a good one too.
Okay.
Yeah.
In some way.
Do
Who's
you
gonna
want to
start
open with
with
the
what?
do you want to open with the triple gem one?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Gem? Does that sound good?
Yes. Okay.
So then I believe this was already talked about yesterday, but what does it mean to you to take refuge in the triple gem? So obviously there's the conventional understanding of Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. So Buddha is in the historical person who taught the Dhamma, and then the Dhamma, the teachings. So then, if they have been useful in one's life, then there's a sense of gratitude that arises. And then Sangha, those beings who have throughout history practiced the Dhamma and then preserved it so that we can practice. So that's on a more conventional level, and then reflecting, I suppose, probably feelings of gratitude, appreciation for these. So a refuge in that sense. But on a more how to say, I don't know, not transcendental, but I suppose inner level. So often what they describe like Buddha as in that quality here and now, that which knows. So that in the mind which knows, that is able to discern, that has so that quality within us, that is in a sense can symbolize the Buddha, or indicate where the direction where liberation might lie. So Buddha, in that sense, the inner quality of knowing, and then Dhamma as in the way things are, the way it is here and now. It's suppose reality as it is, as one is experiencing it in the present. So then that can, the Dhamma can be thought of in that way, the way it is. And then Sangha can be thought of as that quality within oneself which sort of aspires to liberation, or aspires to goodness, or kindness, compassion, wishing, that inclination to practice, to both lead to an end to one's own suffering, and then also helping others. So yeah, I suppose those two ways of looking at it on a more conventional level, and then on how those qualities that the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha might represent manifest in one's present experience. And another, yeah, when I was Anagarika, there was one monk gave a talk that I found very disturbing, seeing something happening in the community and expressing, at least from to what I found not very wholesome views, and very to me I felt quite disturbed. And I was talking to various Aryans, and one of the Aryans I was talking to, then he asked, "So is this person your refuge?" And I said, "Not really." And then he said, "Oh, then what is the refuge?" It's Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And where is Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha? It's here. So that aspect also I found very helpful, because inevitably in any human institution, human beings, group of human beings, one would inevitably come across many things that can be criticized, many faults, but then what does it mean to take refuge? And I suppose we don't really know unless, I suppose, as one approaches enlightenment, then one would understand probably in a deeper sense what these might mean. But yeah, I suppose yeah, I suppose it's something that constantly unfolds one's understanding of what it means to take refuge. Yeah, that's some things I feel too.
Before we go on, I just want to ask, like, Rachel, are you okay there? Do you want to sit on the chair rather on the side somewhere?
I feel a bit weird, like sitting here. Maybe, yeah. Can I put it on the?
Yeah,
on the side?
sure, if you can, of course.
Want to go? Fine.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure if I really get this question, but I'll read it to you. How do I balance creating the right condition for practice and living comforts and living a virtuous life, a right livelihood, when creating those conditions might be harmful in itself? Is there such a thing as purity? So I'm not entirely sure where you're coming from, and I have the feeling there's far more to this question and more like personal circumstances that are underlying this question. That anything, something specific that you're thinking about, but you're trying to write it generally. So that's my feeling of it. I might be wrong, but that's one thing I can think of that somebody might be thinking about here. Is like a question we had last Wednesday on the Q&A on Zoom, where somebody said that his parents or their parents were not particularly happy with wanting to ordain. With them wanting to ordain, and you could see that it's like, well, I'm harming my parents, or so if it's harmful in a way because they are upset, but that's not really harmful in itself. That's not a harmful thing, but I can see how you can see it as that, because the thing is not that if whatever you're going to do, there will always be situations where you're doing things out of a really good intention, and that somebody might not like because they want you to do something different out of their own defilements or out of their own attachments. And yeah, at some point that will resolve itself. But so I'm not entirely sure where this question is coming from or how to answer this, because to me, creating the right conditions for practice would always involve like right livelihood, because otherwise you don't have the right conditions for practice either. Right livelihood is part of right practice. So and also you have to, whatever you're doing, you have to also have love and kindness to yourself. That's very important in quite often we think of like, oh, right, what we have some idea of what right conditions for practice are, and but it's not compassionate to ourselves. And that's a lovely image here from Nepal. And if you have a chance, then please go have a look at it. But it's from the Buddha, and on the one side is his mother giving birth, and then in the middle there's the Buddha, completely emancipated and near to death, because he did so many ascetic practices. And that's not the right way. And the Buddha himself said that this is not the right way, it didn't work. So that was actually creating harm for himself, but it was not the right condition for practice. And he learned from that and he went the other way and then became enlightened, which is the next image in there. So that's sort of what I can think about. But I'd rather just talk to you in an interview or something, and then we can talk about it, like give more of a feel for what's going on there, what's underneath that this question more, and what your personal conditions are that you feel that there's something harmful in what you're doing. Ajahn, is there anything you want to?
Maybe just a few follow-up comments. It's true, this question, and even how one's feeling this and expressing it could have several nuances here. But one thing that just occurred is that the right conditions for practice and living comforts and living a virtuous life, well, going back to sort of my early spiritual unfolding and seeing how I was getting very inspired by certain spiritual ideals, and even prior to that, like things like different kinds of activism or political or environmental activism, and also things like veganism. Those were wonderfully inspiring and sort of ideals that really begin to evolve into spiritual ideals. Like, I guess this was also that Zoom Q&A we had about like altruism in relationship or something like that. And so rather quickly, I was confronted with the realities of my present life and how I was acting, and just maybe conditioned actions regarding how I would act in relationships, or the kinds of food I would eat, or the impact I was having on the environment, just things like that. But my ideals changing much quicker than sort of my life and my actions. And so there was that sort of dissonance for some time, while certain, features of my everyday life began to come more into alignment with the new vision that I had about how to be in the world in a more, a very more progressive way, or a more harmonious way, or more consideration for the health of the environment, and more consideration for the welfare of animal beings, say things like that, and just more consideration for how to have a skillful relationship with a partner or with friends or things like that. So I could feel elements of that and this kind of a question of just how to be aligning or realigning or shifting alignment in one's life regarding new spiritual inspirations or even spiritual ideals one's having. And especially if one is a bit more on the idealism side or the going to extremes side of things, or the kind of perfectionist side of things, there could be a lot there. One could feel, wow, this is really, there is a lot of change that seems like wants or needs to happen quick. And sometimes those changes just might take a little time to shift like that. And as we are more internalizing kind of the realignment with the new vision or the new view, that kind of a thing, to lead a more virtuous life, or those who maybe are helping to inspire us in our new vision, say maybe they are already more experienced spiritual practitioners and have already had a lot of this realignment shift occur. So we might be taking them as the examples and feel that we're sort of lagging behind a little bit, or still like in error as far as hypocritical, feeling dissonance inside about not really acting according to our new values, our new priorities, things like that. And for a while, those habits, I mean, they often, it's true, they can change suddenly or remarkably. Many ways you get a near-death experience and you can have a spiritual urgency, crisis, and awakening almost overnight. And I almost seem to have that with this rattlesnake bite incident, or even these days, like psychedelic therapy can really, completely deprogram and reprogram, or have a radical new worldview or paradigm shift emerge as if, suddenly overnight or very quickly in one's life. And so the realignment there can be some lag time there as we start to put things into action. I mean, everyone knows it's one thing to have a theoretical understanding or view, or even be in agreement, but then putting it into action can be the tricky part. I mean, it speaks volumes to practitioners who do see that the real action in the practice is putting the theory into practice. Theory is easy, but actually putting it into practice, there's often quite a big gap there. And the more we're able to put the theory into practice, it kind of comes alive and transforms those habits in action. And we know we need to do that. And that's why they do call it a practice, meaning you put it into action. That's really the only thing that seems to transform those habits in the genuine way, is through doing it. So doing our Dharma is a little slogan we used to have in our practice circles, that it's things we do, not so much that we think about or talk about, but it's most important that we're doing it. So those were just a few thoughts. And is there such a thing as purity? Purity could be a loaded word. How much religious baggage is in that one? Did one have, religious trauma in childhood? Would want to use the word purity? Or just as we kind of brought it up the other day, pure meaning like pure water. So what's it pure of? You could just say certain, contaminants or pollutants or dirt, things which make it unsafe to drink. So purity is a quirky word, pure. There could be just better words that communicate such a thing as purity. I would use like alignment, that kind of a thing. But even then, one's got to just hold space for And in some traditions, they really hold space for not everything being perfect. Like the imperfection is part of the perfection. Or this thing about idealism. Some in some circles, idealism is a dirty word. Also, Samato used to say that. He said, "But Nibbana is the highest ideal, isn't it? Don't be too idealistic." So, yeah, there's a lot to say, and we'll pass the purity question on to Ajahn Santa.
Yeah. So I might not be able to address the specific thought behind the question, but yeah, I suppose more general reflection based on maybe starting out with, is there such a thing as purity? And I suppose on a conventional level, I would say not really, because that thing of just by existing, we are automatically complicit in various systems and structures that cause harm. So, for example, this cloth, it might have synthetic fibers, so then that means in the oil industry, or in order, we need to eat in order to live, and even if someone is vegetarian or vegan, it of course encourage people to consider, but even then, the harm that industrial agriculture causes in terms of labor conditions or pollution, death, killing animals, rich countries exploiting poor countries. Or for myself, living in growing up in a country like the UK, which historically has caused such atrocities across the world, and even now continues to cause atrocities either directly or indirectly, with weapons industry or exploiting resources, etc. And then obviously as someone living there, then I will be benefiting from those harmful actions. So then just that I suppose that question of how is one to live in such a world, and that I suppose it's a matter of reflecting or attempting to learn about the various systems and structures that cause harm, and seeing other ways one can live, to sort of ways of thinking that we might have unconsciously adopted that might cause harm to various groups of people, and then examining or reflecting other ways changes I can make in my life, in what I do, how I think, that might reduce the harm that one might cause. And with the recognition that it's not really possible to completely sort of be pure or be not complicit, but at least to move in a direction that minimizes harm. And yes, exactly as Ajahn was saying, this thing it can take it's a process. It can take a long time for things to adjust. One might see that, okay, this by doing this, or then that's participating in such and such harmful thing, but then one still can't change that yet, or it takes time to change due to external circumstances or one's habit patterns or whatever. So Yeah, so that thing of just not expecting perfection, but I suppose that constant attempt to, uh, I suppose, move towards right livelihood, or move towards right action, right way of living in the world, this particular world, with all its um, the harm that I mean, if we walk into any room, like here, each object we see has a history, it then spontaneously appears. Where were the resources extracted from, under what conditions, what were the labor conditions, what, etc., etc. So, and then it's that aspect of sila as well, and as one practices more, and hopefully reflects in a deeper way, then one's understanding would hopefully become more subtle, and one would become more aware of how one's thought, how one's actions, body, speech, and mind, one's ways of thinking might be causing harm in more subtle ways, and then one can sort of gradually refine how one lives in the world further. Yeah, that's things that come to me.
Can I say something more
Sure.
about that? Yes. It's the harmlessness is the word ahimsa in Pali. And in the time of Buddha and still nowadays, there was another order, and that was the order of the Jains. And that was ahimsa was their core, what they were working with. Interesting fact as well is that in the time of the Buddha, the Jain nuns order was far bigger than the monks order, and that was not the case for the Buddhists, by the way. But that ahimsa in the Jain order goes quite far. For instance, you don't dig up or you don't eat root vegetables, because by doing so you kill the plant. Or they walk with a little broom in front of them to sweep the path, just in case there might be any insects on the path that you might otherwise step on. So things like that. So I don't know all the details of how they practice, but the Buddha also quite often mentioned that was going a little bit too far, and he didn't want to go in that same in that way. So yeah, I can see in therefore it's like there is a little bit of a balance that you have to take. It's like, and seeing it's like, well, how can I minimize harm, the harm that I do, but still be able to practice for the greater good, actually, because if I don't, yeah, I even by living, by just breathing, we kill living beings. By just being, by eating, and anything we do, just by being alive. And that doesn't mean to say that we should all like stop being alive, because that's not what we're here for. What we're here for is to practice in the Buddhist teachings, so that we can minimize, on one hand, that harm that we do in the world, and also benefit beings better in some way. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Yeah, I was going to add or just comment on a similar point. It does seem that in the early Buddhist teachings here, and in the monastic precepts as well, say for example something like eating meat was allowable, and this does differ from some later Mahayana interpretations and even the early sutras, which they attribute to the Buddha and as an express prohibition of eating meat. But these early discourses, there are 10 kinds of, for taking the meat as an example, there's 10 kinds of meat that monastics are not to eat, such as human, elephant, horse, snake, dog, rat, etc. And also, one is not to eat meat which one sees, hears, or suspects might have been killed specifically for the monastic. So there are, some, precept prohibitions there, but it doesn't, the Buddha, and in response perhaps to this Jain interpretation of karma and intention and action like that, the Buddha probably was in response to focusing more on what one's immediate intentions are, like this sila aspect, or virtue and ethics, which is a right livelihood, is a part of that. That does have more to do with what our intentions are, the intentions informing our actions. And as well, our monastic precepts, many of them do have to do with what the intention is, in addition to what the action is. For example, if one does have an action and break a precept, but the intention wasn't there, it's actually not a broken precept. Or if one does, say, strikes an aggressor to disarm them, it's not necessarily an offense if one were to strike them out of anger, because that intention it's called desiring freedom, or even better, if one can do that without anger. That might not always be possible. So often there is this factor of intention which is getting highlighted. And so something like being complicit, and I would get into these discussions with my sister, who has been, a vegan since her preteens and has a very sort of bleeding heart compassion for many of these issues. And we would get into this discussion where if we are accepting meat, these days, even though I came as a militant vegan, I sort of became an almsitarian, where you eat what's offered and with gratitude. And there's many nuances involved with that. But we do have many monastics who do resolve to be vegetarian for life, or even vegan for life, because they feel very strongly about those issues and they want to set that example and have their conduct be in alignment with what they feel. So that's very admirable as well. But this strategic, focusing more on what our intentions are and learning how to discern more what is skillful and unskillful and wholesome and unwholesome, does very much seem to be the heart of the ethics and virtue, the sila practice. And it will have to do with a lot that term sama sila, or right ethics, how our wisdom is informing it. So it definitely, so this was a huge insight to me. My first year as a monastic is the wisdom element of ethics and virtue, as well as the wisdom element of samadhi. And we're often presented it that way, the Eightfold Path, or it's sometimes considered three of, ethics, meditation, and wisdom. The simile we get is it's like a tripod, or like a three-legged stool. They actually do all merge into one, or they're all supporting the practice like that. So the wisdom component of our ethics, of our sila, will very much be addressing questions like these. Mm-hmm. And that isn't something, it's not an either or it's not on or off, but just to, it is something we're developing, is this, the view, or the right view, or just the wisdom and the intelligence that's more aligned with what is skillful and how to bring that into action, and what's unskillful or less skillful, and how to transform that into what's skillful. So that was one comment on that. And also, just one more comment on purity. And it is the ideal of Nibbana is considered this, purity of the heart, or the citta, is pure from greed, hatred, and delusion. So, that ideal is presented very explicitly, in the early Buddhist teachings, as the ideal of enlightenment or awakening, the ideal of Nibbana, and actually what is possible. and what the Noble Eightfold Path does deliver, if it's correctly or successfully fulfilled. So that is a way that they will use this term purity to say a heart is pure. Well, what's it pure of? It's pure of greed and intentions of greed, desires of greed, desires, intentions of anger, aversion, hatred, and desires, intentions that come from delusion, or that kind of sense of self there. So purity is used in that way. And that's definitely something that one can just begin to discern more and more. Like we were just saying about the sila, it's just looking with more clarity what my intentions are. And are they actually pure of greed, pure of anger? Delusion's a sneaky little one. That's what's always rationalizing in the background. Oh, go ahead and do it. It's okay. But the delusion also, we can learn to see that in our intentions as well, and just try to have our intentions be pure in that sense to the best of our ability. Yeah. See, a lot came out of this this ambiguous question here. A lot reading between the lines and then some. Did you have another one? I have this one. This one.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, dear.
There were a few more there, but yeah, please do.
You still have one?
I don't think we can finish them all anyway.
Okay.
Well,
Okay,
I think we're from yesterday, so oh, yeah.
Yeah, these two are just from yesterday. So, can collective and individual grief play a role in practice? Collective and individual grief. I mean, it can, like they say, it's like suffering. There's can have two results: suffering that leads to more suffering, or suffering that leads to search. Or search as in, oh, is there an end to all this suffering? So that question might arise: why is there all this suffering? And then that question: is there an end to all this suffering? So then that, so as one might become more aware of one's own individual grief in whatever form that might manifest, or maybe collective grief, historical, the grief from historical condition, etc. Then yeah, I suppose in one sense it can play a role in practice in terms of developing that sense of urgency to truly understand where where, where this suffering comes from, initially on an internal level for oneself, but then also maybe on an external level, and then on collective and individual grief. So I suppose, yeah, I mean, one can get so overwhelmed by the nature of this world and the atrocities that one might see. And so Yeah, I mean that's what comes to mind in terms of that thing of grief, suffering that leads to more suffering, or suffering that leads to search. Or if one finds oneself getting overwhelmed, just completely despairing, then perhaps it might not be. One might need to sort of take one's mind away from that grief or have some sort of respite. But then, to whatever extent one is capable to be with that grief, to sort of examine what it is, and then use it as a sort of to motivate oneself in order to examine deeper, in order to understand where where it might be coming from, understanding the nature of suffering and the end to suffering more clearly, both on a personal level and also maybe on an external level. And that's what comes to mind.
Aya, do you want to go first?
Yes,
I
okay.
have a few things to say too.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, what I want to say is grief is a fairly strong emotion quite often that occurs when we've lost something that we felt kind of was important in our lives. And like any strong emotion, actually, it's good to first recognize it and and accept and fully experience and feel what that is and how we feel it in our body, in our mind, how what resonances there might be on the body for that, and to stay with that with love and kindness, with mindfulness, and to really allow that to feel that and to start to investigate like, well, where did this come from, not like by thinking about it but by simply staying with it with this love and kindness. Then at some point some idea will come up why this emotion is there, what is underneath that. You might get some ideas of what's going on, and at some point this will help to let it go, because then it's not no longer overwhelming or overpowering, and the intensity becomes less. But we can come out of that. And sometimes there's also other emotions involved, like the fear of letting go of grief. Like, oh, I'm not allowed to not grieve because I should be grieving. There's a story from a woman who lost her daughter because she was murdered by a serial killer, and this woman would go to all kinds of conferences about grief, and talking about grief in all these conferences, but she was not allowing herself to let it go, because that was felt like letting go of her child. So this, she had to constantly, there was also this fear underneath of letting go of grief meant she didn't no longer care about that. But if you learn to go underneath and let go of these feelings, you start to learn that you're actually caring more and having more compassion also for others. But it doesn't mean, yeah. So if you learn to see what else is underneath, if there's fear underneath, or whatever kind of other emotions might be associated with that, or have some kind of other parts of you that might have like an opinion on that or something like that, you start to see the whole what's going on, and the whole the investigation, the wisdom that comes up from that. You can learn to let it go. I think that's where we all have to go at some point, but it's not always easy, I think.
Yeah. and it's not entirely sure what the context is here for collective and individual grief, or if it is like there are specific Pali terms. One means more grief, one means more, anxiety, things like that. If this is the one like grief, like grieving a loss, that could be a little bit more specific. If it is more like suffering in general, well, the Buddha is, highlighting or flagging that this suffering is the great motivator for us. As Ajahn Santa mentions, often just for simplicity's sake, we begin to explore like suffering by saying, well, there is a kind of suffering that leads to more suffering, but there's also a kind of suffering which leads to the end of suffering. This is how it's presented to us. And there is even a Pali term about this special kind of domanassa, this special kind of mental suffering, which does have to do with being anxious to overcome suffering, but in a positive way, in a skillful way. It's going to lead to less suffering, that's going to lead to liberation. Not everyone has to go that way. Fortunately, it's called the dukkha patipada, the dukkha way of practice, but some of us unfortunately do have to go that way. There's a lot of dukkha early on, but we'll begin to see this kind of dukkha does lead to the end of dukkha, even just like we were talking about this going against a craving, a habitual craving. Well, that can be unpleasant for sure, because we feel we're going to lose the pleasure that we don't get from being restrained on that craving. But also one can learn to have a special appreciation and even delight in that kind of an unpleasant sensation of going against a habitual craving, because one begins to see, this unpleasant feeling is actually leading to freedom from dukkha, freedom from suffering, almost like a kind of a detox one will get from, going off drug addiction or something like that. There's detox, but one knows it's going to be for one's better health or well-being. Even such a thing like a fever, sometimes we have to go through a kind of a detoxification, and it's definitely the same with craving. I mean, they're related, very related to like the physical health kind of a thing. So the Buddha did call, suffering or dukkha the great motivator. In fact, even in the dependent, we keep talking about dependent origination or dependent cessation. There's another model of that, another version, which is called dependent liberation. So it goes all the way from ignorance to suffering, and then it goes from suffering to liberation. And it says suffering is the cause and the condition for faith to arise. Because usually some form of suffering will bring us to the Dharma, because we're searching for a way out of suffering. And in that sense, that suffering is good. If we had remained sort of sleepwalking through, a mildly pleasant life, and had not sought out a freedom from suffering, we might not have found the Dharma. So that's why the Buddha is said to, the Buddha did not praise all contentment, and wants us to be very weary of becoming complacent with very superficial forms of pleasure or contentment. So in that sense, some of the suffering can be serving us very, very well, or even like grieving a loss of a loved one, or a near-death experience, or a sudden illness. That kind of a grief or a suffering can be what does open up a search in our life for how to deal with suffering. Even a mental health crisis that can open up our search, or in some way we are guided to the Dharma in one way or another. And so it can very much play a role in practice, and in many, many more ways besides, as far as motivating us. And as far as collective grief or suffering is concerned, certainly as one does begin to feel more the universal nature of the human experience, and even if the sense of self and other beginning to subside, or just we're starting to see and appreciate each other as sentient beings and a humanity, well, it starts to care for the suffering of others much in the same way it cares for the suffering of itself. this heart, or this chitta, and that becomes a more universal thing. And when you get enough of your suffering sorted out, it still cares about suffering, just like, think of parents and their children, or, loved ones. It will care about suffering of other sentient beings, which it doesn't feel so separate from anymore. Actually feels united or kind of unified with them as fellow sentient beings. And we all probably know this is sort of the bodhisattva ideal. We're part of the Enlightenment Project, and part of the dissolution of self-otherness has to do with this sort of more universal caring or expression of the heart. So one definitely does feel that begin to shift to care about collective suffering as a whole, as one gets some, surplus Dharma energy to be able to do that. So that was another comment on that. Oh, 1958. Oh my gosh. Do we have time for the question on chitta?
Probably.
That takes an hour.
Or can we just read it out as like a cliffhanger?
Yeah.
Well, we still have also those other two questions from yesterday that we didn't.
Oh.
But yeah, maybe today
Are we
probably does not.
Well, these were.
There was one about Babasan, huh?
Mm-hmm.
And
Did you
what
feel-
about Upadana and stuff?
Did Ajahn, he riffed on those in his Four Noble Truths Dharma talk today. Did you want to say more on those?
Oh,
And
oh.
Tanha and Graston? I still want to at least read out the chitta.
Yeah, I think
So,
probably
Okay.
because
let's
it's
do the
almost
Chitta one and then
Right.
we can.
Tanha will
Yeah,
keep
and
coming up
if-
every
if
day.
something
The Four Noble
comes
Truths,
in.
we'll make sure they come up every day from here on. Now that we're in insight mode. Not escape the Four Noble Truths, actually. So here's this question. Dear Venerable Ajahn Bodhisattva, according to my understanding, the term chitta is used when one refers to the quality of the mind/heart. And then see chitta anupasana, HNNO. I think Mahasati.
Majjhima Nikaya.
Oh, Majjhima Nikaya 10. That's right. The
Yeah.
Satipatthana Sutta, Chitta Nupassana. The undefiled chitta is sometimes called original mind or pure mind in the Thai forest tradition. Nevertheless, also the undefiled chitta is impermanent. Is my understanding correct? Could you please explain the terms mano and ceto in relation to chitta? Right, so these were exactly the kind of questions I was asking when I first came. What's the difference between mind and chitta? And I would have put consciousness in here too, but it's in there. So it's a good, excellent question on chitta, and it's definitely tied to some of the Thai forest idiosyncratic use of the term chitta. I make a few tiny little comments.
Yes, please.
We're a minute over. Okay, well, when I first came to the Thai forest tradition, and I had come through, sort of Indian spirituality in the broadest sense, but my first teacher said something which was so impactful, and this is Ajahn Panya, who I had mentioned, and he said, Nibbana is our true nature, and we know it by being it. And the pure chitta is Nibbana. Ding. So maybe we'll get to elaborate on that a little bit tomorrow, I hope. But yeah, where Nibbana is not permanent or impermanent. And the dimension of Nibbana is said to be timeless. And so that is also said to be the dimension of the chitta when it's pure, or the pure chitta. And that is the thing which realizes Nibbana. So a lot of that made sense to me, even if there are, terminology inconsistencies in the suttas, things like that. But yeah, maybe we can go into that a bit more tomorrow. It's a lovely question on chitta. Okay. Thank you once again, everyone, for wonderful questions.
Shall we leave it?
Oh, yeah. Yep. If we can keep all the questions here, actually.
This is one thing I still want to mention, as we've been mentioning dependent origination a couple of times, and some of you are not quite familiar with that. Even if you are, there is a very good little booklet downstairs that you can take from Ajahn Brahmali about, it's called Dependent Origination, Dependent Liberation, and it gives a very good and simple overview of what that really is and of the terminology in there. So if you're interested in that, it's downstairs. Okay. Get that question in 3 minutes. Wow. I think it might take half an hour tomorrow.
Yeah.
Probably.
Well,
Well, meditate for about 25 minutes. And start by sitting comfortably. Relaxing your body, scanning your body to make sure it's relaxed everywhere. Especially your face. See how your forehead feels. If you have tensions there, you can relax. Around the eyes. Temples. Around the ears. Nose. Cheeks. Around the mouth and chin. And when you're feeling relaxed, take a few long deep breaths. With every out breath, just relax a little bit more. Allow your breath to come back to a natural rhythm. Coming in and out, just at its own pace. breath that gives us life. This air that comes in that touches all people in the world. This breath, our true friend. Welcome the breath when it comes in with love and kindness. Thank you for being there, for giving me life. Oxygen going through the entire body. Breathing out this love and kindness. With every little molecule. For the plants to be able to convert that again to oxygen. Other people and animals to be able to breathe it again. All the love and kindness. Breathing in, having a love and kindness for yourself. It spreads with all those molecules of oxygen through your entire body. Breathing out love and kindness for the world. Breathing in love. Breathing out love. Breathing in love for yourself. Breathing out love for others. How does that feel within yourself? Love for your breath. Love for yourself. Breathing out to love for others. With all these molecules that are coming out, going back into the world. Coming near to the end of the meditation. Take a few minutes to reflect back. How does that love feel within yourself? How does it feel to breathe it out? The rest of the world. There's no difference between us and the rest of the world. Same air comes in and goes out. And finally, we share the merits of our practice. All beings in the world, above, below, all around. May all beings be happy, peaceful. May all beings finally realize Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu. Wishing you all good night. Hope to see you again tomorrow morning. Arahant?
Two closing chants?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Everyone's gonna help out.
Aham Sama Sambuddho Bhagava